Hi there everyone and welcome back to the channel. I hope you found my previous videos on asbestos useful. Today's video is about health and safety again. This episode is going to be a clean-up episode of sorts, catching a load of other pieces of legislation that you need to be aware of, as well as the RICS guidance note on surveying safely. This will be the final episode in our mini-series on health and safety. So today we will be covering the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, COSHH or Control of Substances Hazardous to Health, RIDDOR, which is reporting of injuries, diseases or dangerous occurrences, the Working at Height regulations, the Corporate Manslaughter Act, and last but not least the RICS Surveying Safely Guidance Note. So let's start with the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. This is the cornerstone of all health and safety legislation in the UK. It places responsibility on the employer to ensure the safety of all of their employees and the public that may be affected by the organisation's business or work activities. It places duties on employers to train their staff adequately and have health and safety procedures in place. It also requires employers to have adequate welfare facilities for their staff and ensure that their staff are working in a safe and properly maintained environment. It also requires suitable provision of health and safety information. This is usually in the form of the Health and Safety at Work Act poster that you may see in the lunchroom, in the office maybe, or on a construction site in the work cabin. This information may also be issued on a leaflet. Most businesses are also required to have a written health and safety policy unless the business has less than 5 employees, and the enforcing body for this act is, as you would have guessed, the Health and Safety Executive. So it's important to note that it's also a criminal offence not to adhere to these regulations and can lead to a 2-year prison sentence and an unlimited fine. It's important to understand that the legislation applies to construction sites in the same way that it applies to workplaces. As always, the regulations are freely available online, as are all health and safety documents in the UK. Next up, COSHH or Control of Substances Hazardous to Health. These regulations came into force in 2002. It places a duty on the employer to mitigate the exposure to their employees of substances that can be harmful to health. Employers must undertake risk assessments and act to ensure the safety or safe reduction in exposure to substances that are harmful to health. The HSE provides guidance on what these substances are, and employers are expected to monitor compliance with the control measures they put in place, as well as training their employees where necessary. There was an update in 2020 to the workplace exposure limits that comes under the COSHH regulations 2002. This guide in summary sets out the substances that are harmful to health and time that employees can be legally exposed to them. It also transparently sets out how the limits are calculated and information on how employees can be exposed. These regulations are particularly important to our industry in construction in particular, as we work with materials and chemicals that are harmful to health on a regular basis, and some of our working methods risk workers being exposed as well. Again, all this guidance is on the HSE website, so do go and have a look for yourself. Next up, RIDDOR, Reporting of Injuries, Diseases and Dangerous Occurrences Regulations 2013. RIDDOR puts responsibility on employers to report serious incidents that happen in the workplace. These come in the form of accidents, occupational diseases and specified near misses. An accident is reportable when it is work-related or a reportable injury type. The types specified are deaths other than suicide, fractures to anything other than fingers, thumbs or toes, amputations, injury that will likely lead to loss of sight or partial loss of sight, and any crush injury to the torso or head that causes damage to internal organs, serious burns and certain losses of consciousness. Another part of the regulations you need to be aware of is that if you are unable to work for 7 days following the incident must be reported within 15 days of the incident taking place. If the employee is out of action for 3 days, this must be recorded in the accident book but does not require to be reported. Side note, this is actually under the Social Security Regulations 1979 that all employers that have over 10 employees must keep an accident book. If a member of the public is hurt on site and required to be taken directly to hospital, this also needs to be reported. So to report an incident, you go on the HSE website and use an online form. So, next up is the Working at Height Regulations 2005. Essentially with these regulations, do as much work as possible on the ground and make sure workers can get safely to and from where they need to work. Working at height is defined as any height that workers can be injured by from falling from that height. It was brought in, as is the same for all of these regulations, due to a number of fatalities due to working from height. The key messages from the HSE are: avoid working at height. If it can't be avoided, ensure it's set up safely using the correct equipment, and minimise the distance of the fall as much as you can. You only have to go onto YouTube and search scaffolders in the 50s and 60s to see what it was like before these regulations were put in place. It's heart and mouth stuff. It's important to understand, apart from asbestos, falls from height are actually the most common cause of fatality in the construction sector. So as a project manager, it's something you want to keep at the absolute forefront of your mind when reviewing a CPP or going to site. Again, all of this information is available on the HSE website, so do go check it out. Our final piece of legislation is the Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act 2007. This act essentially allows employers to be found guilty of manslaughter or homicide through gross misconduct, serious management failures, or breach of their duty of care. Unlike the other pieces of legislation we've been through, the enforcing body for this one is actually the Ministry of Justice. HSE is not the enforcer, but will most likely be informed in any court cases, and they may bring cases potentially to the Ministry of Justice. This act is only concerned with prosecuting corporate bodies, but when this occurs, it's likely that another HSE law has been broken, and it's likely that the HSE will look to this to prosecute the individuals involved. And finally, you need to read Surveying Safely. The Surveying Safely guidance note is something you'll definitely be asked about in your APC. This is because it's the only RICS guidance note on the topic of health and safety. So read it and be able to answer questions about its contents. As a member, you'll be expected to follow everything in its first chapter. This chapter is personal responsibilities for RICS members and corporate responsibilities for RICS firms. In this chapter, they talk about international work and what to do when you're working internationally. Firstly, you would consult the required law of that country as your starting point. It also covers the importance of dealing with any breaches of health and safety in the correct way, and the effect this will have on an insurance underwriter's assessment of your firm. And it also talks about the rules and regulations that must be in place for an RICS regulated firm. The starting point for any RICS regulated firm would be ISO 45001, a recognised international operating standard for health and safety management systems. It also covers personal responsibilities as an RICS member to ensure corporate health and safety measures and policies are followed and practiced effectively. The RICS expects you to maintain proper competence in these areas, and they expect you to do this by keeping up to date with the health and safety news, regulations, and of course doing any training that's available at your firm. It goes on to cover organisational responsibilities around training, provision of PPE, information and equipment, and this is why you have to do a ton of health and safety training when you start a new job at an RICS regulated firm. So all that information is actually just in chapter 1, and the other chapters have a lot more information about the RICS workplace, fire safety, visiting sites and more. Go and read it as your first point of call if you're taking your APC. Right, and that's all for today. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you found this mop-up episode useful. Do go through and read all of these for yourself. There are no shortcuts when it comes to health and safety. You just got to get stuck in and you'll find the information will stick a lot better, and you'll continue to develop professionally faster as a result. So yeah, this has been a mini-series which has comprehensively outlined all of the things you'll need to know for your level 1 APC competency, health and safety, but in terms of depth, it won't be enough. Also, remember there is a level 2 to this competency, so that's taking all of the things you know in level 1 and putting it into practice and being able to evidence this. But yeah, thanks. I really look forward to any feedback you have, and if you think I've missed anything or have any questions, please, as always, leave them down in the comments section and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks for watching. Consider giving this video a like if you enjoyed and subscribing if you would like to see more.